All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all having a wonderful Dreamforce so far. My name's Karen Fidelic. I am one of the product managers on our Salesforce DX product suite. I'm here to talk to you today about metadata coverage as it pertains to Salesforce DX. So the first thing we want to cover here is our forward-looking statement. Just a reminder that we will be talking about a few things that are in the future. Please make your purchasing decisions based on currently available and generally available software. So a little bit of an agenda here of what we'll be talking about. I'm going to go over just a really quick overview of what metadata is, why is it important. I'm going to introduce our new enhanced metadata coverage report, give you a look at what that looks like. We'll talk about how metadata is used within Scratch orgs and some intricacies there. We'll talk about our progress toward closing gaps, which is a lot of what we're kind of addressing here, and then takeaways and next steps. So what is metadata? Metadata is the core part of our platform that really allows you to customize applications within the Salesforce platform. It allows you to build customized apps, and it allows you to move those changes between different environments that you're working on. If you spend any time working with Salesforce DX, if you spend any time listening to us talk about Salesforce DX, you will know that we really drive home the value proposition of automation. Automation for source control, for continuous integration, for continuous delivery, basically everything under the application lifecycle management process. In order for that automation to work, our metadata needs to be supported through our metadata exposure channels, which are the tools and APIs that provide the ability to move metadata. Okay? When we have cases where our metadata is not supported through any of these channels, the automation in those ALM automation flows will break. And maybe you've encountered some of these issues. Maybe you've got changes that you've made within the setup UI. You've customized an organization. You want to then move that change programmatically between environments. And then come to find out that that piece of customization is not supported in the metadata API. And therefore, you can't use change sets. You can't use the metadata API through Ant. You can't push those changes into a Scratch org. That is because we have gaps within our metadata API that prevent that automation from happening. So we have been focused on an initiative to close those gaps. And what I'm going to talk about here is how we're going about that, how you can provide input into that process, and how we're doing toward that process. We have been focusing on what we consider our core Salesforce DX channels, namely the metadata API, our source tracking capabilities within Scratch orgs, and our packaging technology. That's where we're focusing our efforts right now on closing our metadata gaps and ensuring that we have complete coverage so that you can fully automate your flows. So again, this goes back to the desire and the goal of ours to be able to fully automate all of your development and ALM flows. So how are we doing this? This is a pretty simple process that we're going through. 3 steps here. We need to identify and understand what our metadata coverage is within our platform. Where do we have coverage? Where do we have gaps? Once we understand that, we need to prioritize the gaps that we have found so that we can then fix them. And I'm going to talk through a little bit more about what this looks like. So as part of the identification and the understanding of what our metadata gaps are and what our coverage is, we have created a new and improved metadata coverage report. And I'm going to go ahead and show you what this looks like here. So let me switch into our browser. OK. So this is our new and enhanced metadata coverage report. This report is accessible from our developer.salesforce.com dev site. You can access it from our resources menu here, right here, metadata coverage report. We also previously had an earlier version of this report available from within orgs. We had an MD coverage /report.jsp report, which maybe you have seen within orgs. this report will now be redirected from that. So if you go to that existing URL that you used to use, you'll now be redirected to this report. This report is basically, it's pretty simple, right? We're listing all of our metadata types that we've got within our platform, and our metadata exposure channels across the top here. The check marks indicate that we have support within that channel for a given metadata type, and lack of a check mark means that we don't currently have support there. Given that this is now accessible from this public site, we want to make sure that we have the ability to view this data for any version, any release version. So you can select from this version menu here now either summer or winter, and moving forward, we'll have access to future releases as well. We've got some nice ease of use and usability enhancements that we've added here. So things like sorting of the columns. We can sort if you're more interested in one channel or another. We can actually hide channels. So you could hide columns here if you're not interested in particular channels. We can also filter. We can filter this list based on if you know the name of your metadata type that you're looking for, just to make it easier to find. Okay. One of the things that we have found as we've been going through this process is that sometimes what happens is we have a metadata type that is supported. Everything about what our platform tells us is that it's supported in a given channel. But there might be some issue associated with it. Maybe there is a missing field. There's a field that's within a metadata type that's not supported through the API. Maybe there's some intricacy about dependencies when you make changes to a given metadata type. Maybe all of the dependent metadata is not fully connected and pulled down when you do a source pull, for instance. And so what we're trying to do is be able to communicate those issues better to you. And we've got now an integration within this report with our known issue database in our Trailblazer community. So for some of these metadata types, you'll see now that we've got, in this known issues column, links. And these links are, if I open this one here, they will open a view that shows us the known issues that exist for a given metadata type as it pertains to metadata coverage. So we're really trying to bring this information back to you, to give you as much information to make good decisions and understand how you can use metadata within the flows that you're using. Okay. So let me show you a little example here. In this known issues box, we will see a quick summary, a headline of what the issue is, status, how many people have reported this issue, when the last update was. If we click into this, it's going to take us directly to our Trailblazer community, where you can see details of this known issue. This one happens to be one of our heavy hitters. This has over 450 hits of people reporting that this issue affects them. And I'm happy to say this one's actually being delivered in this winter release. This one is about history tracking on custom fields and custom objects not being able to be deployed simultaneously. And so we have delivered that and fixed that in winter. If I go back here, I want to show you one other thing. When we open these known issues, this is your opportunity to provide feedback back to us about what issues affect you. And this is really, really important for us to be able to help us prioritize the issues that we have and make sure that we're delivering those of the most value to you. So when you see one of these issues that affects you, please click this button that says, "This issue affects me." That will give us the feedback that we need in order to appropriately prioritize and make sure we're delivering the highest value. Okay, close that. Another thing that I want to highlight here is, kind of by definition, this report lists metadata types, which are supported in the metadata API. Because we're listing things by metadata type, it kind of implies that they're supported in the metadata API. We have cases where we have functionality that is just entirely not exposed at all through the metadata API. Those are what we would consider our metadata gaps. Metadata API gaps also shows up sometimes on our documentation as unsupported metadata types. What we've done is we've called these out here, kind of by feature name. But these aren't actually the API names because we don't have API access to them yet. So it's a little bit hard, it's a little bit tricky problem to actually account for them here when they don't yet exist. And so these are some that you may expect the names should make sense. And when these things get exposed, they may or may not match the name that you see here. Okay? Just be aware of that when the API does get exposed. I want to give you an example. We've actually, in this release, exposed omnichannel metadata. That was one of our gaps that we've had. If I search for omnichannel here, I see an omnichannel settings metadata object. That's great. But the actual metadata that is going to deliver omnichannel functionality has different names. Presence user config, service presence status, queue routing config. Okay, so you're going to see these come, and they're going to these actually match up to like the setup UI pages that we have for omnichannel. This is one of our highly requested gaps that we've had that now we are able to deliver in these channels. So that's a nice enhancement that we've added. Next thing I want to show is how metadata gets used within Scratch orgs. So one of the things that you may have hit, and if you've been using Salesforce DX and using Scratch orgs are created as empty orgs, and you're able to configure them using a Scratch org definition file. Within that Scratch org definition file, you're able to specify features and settings that you want that Scratch org to be created with. And basically, those are telling that Scratch org how to configure itself in terms of licenses and permissions. Now, we have features and settings that are available in a Scratch org configuration file. And in order to use this metadata, you need to make sure that you have the right features set up in your Scratch org. It's not always totally crystal clear which features are required to enable which metadata. So maybe you've had the case where you've created a Scratch org and tried to push metadata into it and had some failure that that metadata does not have the proper permission in that Scratch org. Okay, so what we've done now is we've added, I'm going to show you one of these examples, a snippet of code that represents a sample Scratch org definition file that will allow a particular metadata type to work within that Scratch org. This is super handy, and really the idea here is to get you going quickly with Scratch orgs to be able to push the metadata that you want into them. This is available on a per edition basis. So in some cases, what you're going to see is, depending on the edition, we have a different set of features and preferences that are going to be required. In this case, for this live agent config, live chat agent config metadata type, it requires a live agent feature and also an enable live agent setting to be set. One really important note with this is an example of a Scratch org definition file that will work. It is not the only one. So you may have other features that will also enable this, but our goal here is to give you one example that we know will work for this metadata type. Okay, so we have these available for all of our metadata types here. In some cases, you're going to see, let me just show another example. One where maybe you don't have any settings or features required. I think this chatter extension is a good example. And this is just basically a default Scratch definition file that you would use here. Okay? In some cases, we actually do have gaps still, where we don't have a feature that can be used to programmatically create a Scratch org to enable a certain type of metadata. Those also are included in the gaps that we're tracking and prioritizing. So we're working hard to ensure that all metadata can be programmatically created, or Scratch orgs can be programmatically created to support all of our metadata. Okay? All right. With that, I'm going to go back. Okay. So moving on, another enhancement we've made around Scratch org definition files are the way that we specify preferences. So if you're familiar at all with using org preferences to define settings and preferences within a Scratch org definition file, we're making a shift in winter to using the kind of native metadata API syntax. It's quite similar, but the benefit here is we're going to get out-of-the-box support for all settings that are supported by the Metadata API. Okay, so I've got an example here that just kind of shows how it would have looked in summer and how it would look in winter moving forward. You can see in here that we've got the hierarchy that matches, again, the hierarchy that you would see in the Metadata API guide. You can see this all in the Metadata API reference guide. And the conversion that we've got now is going to be manual. We're working on a tool to automatically convert these. It's a pretty straightforward conversion, though. Key thing to note here, we're going to support both syntaxes in winter. Both the settings and the org preferences syntax, but you have to use only one or the other. So if you want to take advantage of any of the new settings syntax, you're going to have to convert the org preference syntax that you have over to the new format. So how are we doing on this project? One of the key messages here that I really want to get across is that this is a serious effort within Salesforce that we're putting serious priority on. We talk a lot about metadata completeness over the years, but this is a serious project that we are really putting focus on. And so I want to just highlight some of the metrics that we've got in terms of the progress that we're making. One of the things that we're doing internally is trying to ensure that all new features that Salesforce developers build that go into the products that you have are automatically exposed through those DX metadata channels out of the box. And our metric for this release is that 100% of new functionality that we delivered internally is delivered through all of our core DX channels. So that's really, we are very excited about that. We had 37 metadata types that in the last release were supported through an expanded source tracking preference, which maybe you've seen. You had to enable a preference to get support for these additional 37 types. We've been able to validate all of those and move them into fully supported status. We fixed over 100 bugs in just this release timeframe that affect metadata coverage. These are things like gaps. These are things like missing scratch org features to enable metadata. Also things to support a test framework internally for us so that we can validate as new metadata is coming into our system that it actually works through all of these channels. So we're building infrastructure internally as well as delivering features that you're seeing directly. But all of it goes toward the same goal, which is to deliver complete metadata coverage for you. Okay. And finally, we've got known issues that affect metadata coverage that we are fixing. And again, these hits that you make are helping us prioritize. And so we've got issues that have been fixed, which represent over 480 last time I checked, hits on those known issues. So hopefully some of these will actually impact you and resolve issues that maybe you're also encountering. Our roadmap plans, some things that we're looking at related to this and related to this report moving forward. Gap closure is still and will be our #1 goal. Our #1 priority is making sure that we're closing those gaps to get to the point of full coverage. Within the report itself, we're looking at things like integrating metadata API documentation directly into it. We view this report as becoming sort of the central source of metadata information and metadata documentation. We'll be adding additional channels like the tooling API, the dependency API, which maybe you've heard about, into this report. And also the ability to maybe take a package.xml file or a project or a directory that you've got of metadata and create a scratch org definition file and filter this coverage list down for you so you can get a more easy way to view it, how it affects your project in particular. Key takeaways. So again, metadata coverage is key to a successful Salesforce DX experience. This is why this is becoming so important and really a high priority within Salesforce. Salesforce DX requires it. And so we are putting the effort there. We are putting the effort there. I want to just reiterate that. We have teams that are devoted to this right now. The metadata coverage report that you've seen should be your go-to place for understanding what our coverage is and communicating back to us where issues that you have exist. Your vote does count. I guarantee it. So next steps, please take a look at this coverage report. It's available today from the developer.salesforce.com site. Please vote up the issues that affect you. If you happen to have an issue that's not listed on that report, please communicate that back to us as well, either via a case or through the Trailblazer community. We're working hard to make sure that the known issues that we are aware of are included, but if they're not, please let us know. And finally, we've got some great trails available to learn more about Salesforce DX and get you moving along that journey. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.